One of the things that writers are often told to do is write stories that they themselves would like to read. I feel as if I have written a story that I would like to read. The issue with a statement like that is that not everybody knows what I like to read. I will now tell you 3 books that I really like and a little bit that I know about them. Book 1 is, it belongs in kind of one of the neater genres that the last century has produced because it was kind of wished into existence. See, H.P. Lovecraft hoped that people would take on the universe that he had built up and write their own stories in it. I'm glad that he wished that. It ends up being a big genre, and there are a lot of books in it that I think are better examples of Lovecraftian fiction than Lovecraft himself ever wrote. You can't exactly say that because, without Lovecraft's fiction, there wouldn't be such a thing as Lovecraftian novels, but there are. One of my favorite examples of one is a book called 14 by Peter Clines. You wouldn't guess it was a Lovecraftian novel from reading it, unless you knew a little bit about what you need in order to make a Lovecraftian novel. I understand. It's a piece of very character-driven modern fantasy is what it really is. It's the story of a guy who moves into an odd apartment building in Los Angeles, has some strange roommates, and then discovers some odd stuff about the building. It's a really great book. It's a good example about how a story can have a peculiar premise because of the strange stuff that happens because of his apartment building, but be a great read just because of the characters. It's great characters. They're the kind of characters that you just want to sort of like follow around. I highly recommend 14 by Peter Clines. Second book that I really admire and enjoy and reread and revisit is a book called Tinker, Tailor, Soldier, Spy by John le Carré. There are lots of things I enjoy about the book. One of the features of its sort of reason for existing is something I like about it. It was a book written by John le Carré, who worked for the British Secret Service during the Cold War and earlier. He was actually a contemporary of Peter Fleming, maybe a little bit younger. Peter Fleming was the guy who wrote the James Bond novels. When John le Carré read the James Bond novels, John le Carré thought that they were fun, but he thought the world, that they made a niche, that the James Bond novels made a niche, which was basically stories that were the opposite of James Bond. And so John le Carré came up with this character, George Smiley, who is in every ways just as British as James Bond, but in his methods and things, and in his personality, as about as opposite as James Bond as you can get. In some ways, George Smiley is sort of like a little bit like M. Yeah. The Dame Judi Dench's character. Point being, it's a really great. Tinker, Tailor, Soldier, Spy is a really good British Cold War spy novel, and it has been described as described by spies as one of the most realistic pieces of espionage fiction in the world. I find that fascinating. What I really like about it is that John le Carré has this great way of giving you characters who behave like human beings while still servicing the intricate plot that he has plotted. And it's clear that Mr. le Carré is completely in love with English language from the book, and those are the things that I particularly like about that book. A third book that I really enjoy is a book called The Watchmaker of Filigree Street by a British lady, a British woman named Natasha Pulley. The Watchmaker of Filigree Street is sort of like, I think it's one of the most gorgeous books ever written. It's hard for me to explain exactly what I like about it because the whole thing just sort of like fits together so well. I mean, it's extremely well plotted. The characters hold together wonderfully. Their relationships are really realistic and drive the plot while also coming across as genuine. She has a certain brilliant aptitude with words that I think is a little bit rare in any kind of writer. And the way, and she basically writes a piece of fantasy, and the way that she writes fantasy is I think one of the more impressive examples of how to write fantasy. It is acceptable, like you can accept the world she gives you in kind of an amazing way without feeling too strung along. And there's this other way that I was thinking about it. It's mystical without being fantastical. Those are silly words. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that like it's the kind of fantasy you can wear like an old jacket rather than it's not like cosplaying. It's like wearing your old clothes at a library. It's very comfortable. It's pleasant. So those are 3 books that I really admire, that I really like, that I aspire to write books that can maybe appear on a list with those books. It's 14 by Peter Clines. It's a book I really like. Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy by John le Carré, and a book that if ever I am even slightly compared to it, I will consider myself well chuffed, is Watchmaker of Filigree Street by Natasha Pulley. I have written a book that I would read, and these are other books that I like to read.